Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. Well, today we are going to take a really in-focus look at stencil flipping. This is one of my favorite techniques, but not only that, I want to show you how you can do it with whatever you have in your stash, because there are, as usual, a million ways that we can go about this. And sometimes I think when we just see one specific way or one version or one result, it can be a little like, I don't have that. But hopefully today you can see something and you have something similar. I'm sure you will. You can grab some stencils that you have in your stash. It doesn't really matter what. The more finer detail is a little bit trickier. I find you don't get quite as good results. So have a look through, see what you've got, see if you've got some that have got some sort of definitive lines. They can be quite detailed, just making sure that the actual stencil pieces have, you know, a bit of material to them. So I am going to go through these. I've just gone through my stash, pulled out some that I think could work, and then I went ahead and pulled out lots of media that I think can also work. So we're going to go from things like sprays to paints to powders to all the things that you are able to use. Now, one of the first and easiest is probably going to be sprays. Now, I know not everybody has these specific ones. I have the spritz, a couple of the spritz, and a couple of the Distress Oxide sprays here from Holtz, but you can also make your own, so you don't have to use something that is pre-made. I have some explosion powders that I'm also going to use. Again, there are so many different companies that make these. There are lots of different names for them: pigment powders, explosion powders, and then of course you can just use things as simple as acrylic paint as well. So let's go ahead and see what we've got here. First up, I'm going to be using the Holtz. This is called Brush Hex. Now, of course, I mentioned that sprays are the absolute easiest. They are a bit messy, I will say that, but of course they kind of are the easiest. Now, I happen to only have the Distress Oxides. That means nothing at the moment. Just use whatever you like. I've got a pink and a yellow, and this is of course going to make a little bit of orange, but what we want to do is you want to have two pieces of cardstock out, because we are going to flip the stencil over, hence the name stencil flipping, and press it down onto the second sheet of paper. Then what my preference is to take a dry paper towel or even a piece of like copy paper, just something that can soak up anything that comes out of the creases of the stencil, because that tends to give me a more crisp result on the flipped side of the stencil. So here are the two different versions that we get from using that, because as usual, and as you would expect, there's lots of ink caught up on the outside of the stencil when we spray or when we're inking. Now, if you were to just use, like, for example, a ink and your ink blending over the top, I didn't show that one because I thought that one was somewhat obvious today, but if you're ink blending over the top, then you can use a water reactive ink and then just give it a spritz in between, and then you can flip the stencil and that will get that ink moving onto the other piece. Now this one here is with the Distress Spritz sprays, so these are more mica than pigment, so this one was always going to be a bit risky, and I'm using the Mintay stencil from Meadow. It's called Meadow. And so the first version I really, really like, and then the second version, once I take the stencil off, it's a little trickier to see what the actual design is, but that's kind of part of the fun. You actually get to just explore and give it a go, use what you have, see what comes out. Some stencils are going to work better than others, some products you might find work better than others, but this version here, I think that would just be on the right. That would be a good starter of a background, and we could add more to that. So don't ever throw things away. There's always a way. I like to say there's always another way. I'm going to move on to the Holtz. This one is called Lace. Now, this is one of my favorites. I couldn't resist doing this technique just because I wanted to show you what you can actually do is if you just put one color on, flip the stencil over onto your second piece, so normal stencil flipping, and then whilst the stencil is down on the paper, you can spritz through again, or you can ink blend, whichever you like. Ink blending tends to give a little bit of a more crisp look, but that way you're going to get like the inside coloured that's not coloured at the moment. So it's a bit of a cool trick. This one is maybe not the best colours to show you exactly the technique, But of course, this also means that you can keep flipping that stencil, and this could actually be like a never-ending game. So I'll show you up close. You can see that there is yellow where we did it the first time round, and then we flipped it over and pressed it down, and now there is pink everywhere in between. So a really fun technique. Again, you could do some ink blending instead, and that would give you a nice crisp look as well. And then we are going to use this one here is from Simon Says Stamp. This is called Octo. And this one is quite fine detail, but I'm going to use acrylic paints with this one. Now this one is a Stamperia one, and it is metallic. So I am going to use a little makeup sponge to pop this on. You could use a finger dauber, you can use a paintbrush, you can use anything, a blending brush, that's going to work. I'm just using this as it's nice and handy. I'm going to put this through like you usually would. You don't want to load up your sponge or your makeup brush too much because we don't want to get squish underneath the stencil. But you might ask, a little bit like the ink, how are we going to get enough ink to transfer once we do the stencil flipping? Well, I take this and I give it a really light spray. This is a continuous sprayer and it has a very even mist. So I just do that quickly. You don't want the acrylic paint to dry on your stencil, otherwise it will be permanent. But you give it a quick spritz and then pop it down again. Take a paper towel, give it a good press down, give it a second to transfer, and then you get a pretty good reverse image given how detailed this stencil is. And again, both of these are really metallic when they dry. So that's another fun technique. So, I mean, you can keep going. This is one of those techniques that you could keep endlessly going, and it is a great way to get fast, quick backgrounds and also sort of go a little bit out of your comfort zone. If you like to be, if you like to be in control and like things just so, this is a good way for me in particular to let go a little bit of the end result. Now, I have some explosion powders here. I have from several different companies. I have some Nuvo ones. I have some Cosmic Shimmer ones. I have, a few different ones. And I'm just going to pop the stencil down. Of course, there's always different ways to do this too. Pop the stencil down. Then I have the color on there, and I'm just going to add a bit of water. I didn't think that was dark enough, so I ended up adding another different one on top, give it another spritz, and boy, is there a lot of ink down there now, but we've still got a fairly crisp result actually. I do have quite a bit of water and ink now on the other side of the stencil, so using something to that will absorb some of that excess ink is a great idea here, just so we get a nice crisp version on this side. And I think both of these worked out really well. It's not often that you get a whole perfect image on the reverse side, and again, I mean, maybe I didn't try on the first side, so that's to be expected, but these ones here in particular with the mica powders are super shimmery. So basically, it is whatever you have. Whatever you have, give it a go. Give it a go with your stencils. Make sure you flip it over. It's a good way to use up all that excess ink as well, instead of just dabbing it off or wiping it off. If you want to, you can kind of press the your second piece of paper down onto before you remove your stencil. But of course, that's going to give you a whole different look again. Lots of different ways to go about it, actually. Now, here are some of the results that we've got. This one here is quite metallic. It's gorgeous, and then this one here is a little bit less so, but still quite metallic. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to actually do one card with it, and then I have some photos at the end of another one that I made off camera, just because I thought you might be interested. So here are the two that we also did, and then these are the explosion powders, pigment powders, and again, super shimmery. So I wanted to have a bit of a focal point to go on top of these because, of course, these are essentially backgrounds. You could absolutely cut these up. I have lots and lots of scrap videos. In fact, I have a whole playlist on my channel where you can see how you could cut up some of these backgrounds if you weren't happy with the result. Or not necessarily not happy, but just couldn't really see them working as a background for one of your projects. Now, this here, I'm going to zoom through this part because it's not the focus of the video, but this is what I'm going to use as some focal points today. This is the Altenew Perfect Gift stamp set, and I also have the coordinating stencils. I know that there is more out there that go with this. I know that there is probably a die, and I know there's a couple of other bits and pieces that coordinate, but I can make it work with these, and it's nice to go ahead and purchase the odd focal point. I often find things like embossing folders and stamps, background stamps, things things like that, or I often go for sentiments. Sometimes I have to like really focus and find a focal point stamp, and this one for me is going to be one of those. I don't have enough inks to do all the different layers for the pinks, but that's okay because we just use a lighter version of the same ink and then make it darker for I think there's maybe 5 layers here. Very easy to line up. I will say these companies are fantastic at making these very usable, and this was super easy to line up. However, again, it's if you think that having not enough inks is going to be an issue, it's actually not. You can really, I've shown in plenty of videos before going through my channel around how we can make one ink pad work for so many different shades. And then this one here, I was hesitant about doing this layer because it kind of goes over all of the layers. And again, I didn't have a new color of pink. It was one I'd already used, but I just did like a heavier application, and actually it really does bring together the image. I will say it does work beautifully. Then, as I said, I don't have the dies or anything, but I can fussy cut these out. This is something that I always look at when I go ahead and purchase a stamp or an image or something. It just means I always think, am I going to want to fussy cut this out? I might be able to do it, but when I'm creating, am I going to want to fussy cut that? Otherwise, if it's not, it'll be an image that I avoid. And we don't want that because, you know, I'm investing really good money in purchasing these supplies. Now, I'm going to quickly pop this card together. As I mentioned, there is also another card at the end of this video that I created. I will pop some still images in so that you can see another card that I made. And I actually use the metallic version of the acrylic paint. That's the background. The flipped version is the one that I used for that card. So I'm just popping a happy birthday at the top there. This was one that I kind of did for the Tim Holtz ones because they are not necessarily meant for card making and because they're not quite wide enough to go all the way across. I've turned this one around sideways and I'll use it in a landscape rather than portrait, but I always sort of try not to spray right up to the very edge, and that stops that hard edge because, as I said, his stencils aren't quite wide enough for some of the card making. Now, I've got 2 of these images that I fussy cut out. One is going to go nice and flat, and one is popped up on a little bit of foam tape. This is super simple. This is going to be a gorgeous square card, just trying to make sure everything fits in those outside boundaries, and this was a really easy one to put together. Once I had a few little gems and things, this definitely finishes off and sort of brings it to the next level, and you'll see another one in just a moment as well that I completed. But I hope that you give stencil flipping a go. It is very fun, and that's what I mean. You can do it with whatever you have, and that's most important, that you look at these videos and you think, yeah, I'm sure I've got something I can make work. Well, let's do this. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being here. Supplies will be listed underneath this video. If you want more Natasha content, then you can go to natashafootecreative.com, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye.